Good evening. I hope I'm being heard out there in Mumbai and beyond, perhaps. It's hard for me to say. I'll begin tonight's program, Beyond the Binary, Identities of Intersection, by introducing the Deputy Principal Officer at the U.S. Consulate General in Mumbai. Thank you for joining this evening, and I'm really happy and pleased to introduce Scott. In fact, he rejoined the consulate in summer 2020, just last year, having previously served in Mumbai as a political officer, political chief in 2000 to 2004. So he's very familiar with this landscape and with our audiences. And he's had other prior tours around Africa and in Washington in the Economic Bureau. He's served as economic chief in Cameroon as well as in Ghana. So he's got a broad range of experience across a number of continents and including back home. So we're really pleased to have Scott with us tonight. He's a speaker of French, Spanish, Portuguese. He's received his Master of Arts from the University of Michigan and a Bachelor of Arts from the College of William and Mary. He's from Virginia. He calls Virginia home. So we're really glad to have him, and I'm going to turn things over for welcoming remarks from Scott Tickner. Thank you. Over, Scott.
Hi, Ben. Thank you so much, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second in our series of LGBTQI plus focused dialogues, Beyond the Binary. This series aspires to help us better understand how we can create a society where we all feel welcome to be our true and full selves. As Ben said, my name is Scott Tickner. I'm the Acting Consul General. And it's my pleasure to open today's discussion dealing with the complexities that arise from overlapping identities among the queer community. Specifically, today's program will explore the struggle against discrimination that arises from compounding LGBTQI plus identities with additional identities such as caste, disability, and religion. In his first day in office, President Joe Biden issued a presidential memorandum reaffirming that it's the policy of the United States to, quote, pursue an end to violence and discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or sex characteristics, end quote. That was on his very first day in office. And it's our belief that the end to violence and discrimination begins with compassion and understanding, which is what today's event is all about. With that, Ben, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. It's great to have you here. I want to say again, good evening to our audience, and hello and welcome to our three panelists, Kanishka, Shivangi, and Faraz. I should also welcome warmly our simultaneous interpreters, Monica and Gaurav. Many of you may not be aware, but this program is being simultaneously interpreted, which is a practice we like to do at the State Department. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ben East. I joined the U.S. Consulate General in Mumbai 3 years ago in 2018 as the Director of Public Affairs. And in that role, I enjoy engaging with audiences, new and old. I have some old friends even on this panel, and there's a lot of people out there in this audience, I'm sure, who I've met and acquainted with. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to meeting you again when we can do so physically. But also welcome to audience members who I haven't met yet, and I look forward to meeting you, and I hope that happens very soon. I want to say one housekeeping note for you, which is if you have a question, you can drop that in the Q&A box. Go ahead and ask questions of our panelists. We will be curating them and put those in the Q&A box for our use during the last half an hour of the program. So I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist, that is Kanishka Chaudhry. Kanishka is the co-founder and director of Samavesh Chamber of Commerce, India's first queer, racial minority-led LGBTQI+ chamber of commerce. With substantial global experience in supply chain and diversity and inclusion domains, Kanishka specializes in increasing sustainable and inclusive solutions for his Fortune 100 clients. An MBA from the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, Kanishka is also a certified blockchain and supply chain professional Six Sigma Black Belt specialist and a certified D&I trainer. So I'm just going to say, Kanishka, hello. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you to you, the US consulates, Scott, Ben, Quill, everyone who is part of this initiative, and for inviting us over. Really glad to be part of the panel and to represent Samavesh.
Of course. Very good. So let's get to it. Shall I ask you a question? Let's go back to a program that we had at the consulate. We hosted Dalit activist Suraj Yengde at one of our programs. And he made the argument that caste equality is often overlooked in the discussion of addressing inequality and discrimination throughout Indian society. So the question is, would you say this holds true in the LGBTQI plus rights movement or among the queer community? Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. So it is indeed a very pertinent question because I come from a scheduled caste. I'm born out of a high caste mother and a low caste father, so I'm basically at the lowest rung of all the castes there are. And ideally, I should be working in a crematorium, but I'm not. So, as per my caste related to occupation, but I'm not, thankfully, to the work that my grandfather and the other stalwarts of the Dalit community did in giving us access and opportunity to provide us support and build upon it. But yes, I do agree with Suraj. And uh, to understand what Suraj is saying, we must also take a close look at what India is. It is a very diverse country. We have more than 10 religions. We have 22 official languages. We have 19,500 dialects of those 22 official languages. We have 12 socioeconomic classes. We have more than 500 tribes, 3,000 castes, 25,000 subcastes. On top of that, we have 11 types of identified sexual orientations and 58 types of different gender identities. Now, for everyone to be sensitized towards each other, respect and celebrate our differences, despite whatever our innate biases would be, and then cherish inclusion is indeed a very formidable task. So, coming back to your question, I couldn't agree more with Suraj, and I have my reason for it. When he say what he says has been experienced by me personally. Now, I was born as untouchable due to my caste and as a criminal due to my sexual orientation. I found that coming out as Dalit at the workplace or in the social circle has been more difficult for me than coming out as a gay person because of the stigma that I had faced. Because I faced the stigma of being Dalit when I was born, when parents asked the kids not to play with me. It started from there. While I came to know about my sexual orientation later on when I came out to myself, so it indeed was a very different experience. Now, what Suraj mentions about in his book is about the Dalit individuals who have become privileged by using the access created due to the hard work of Dr. Ambedkar, Jyotiba Phule, Periyar, other stalwarts of the Dalit movement, are nowadays shying away from telling the kids about their own caste identities. And that is indeed true. This coupled with the innate caste phobia that is there within the queer community actually takes a conversation about caste being overlooked within the queer community and within that discussion. So people wouldn't like to talk about themselves being lower caste because they will feel more stigmatized. And I've been asked that question not just in India, but also in the US, Australia, Europe, wherever I have been by other Indians. Funny fact, our surnames are our class markers. So Indians who would like to know about my caste, they would like to understand where I'm coming from. Okay, you're a Chaudhary, so you must be XYZ caste. They make those presumptions. There is that innate phobia that is there. So uh, that baggage is carried everywhere. And those are few. Not all high caste people are phobic or caste phobic. It's some of them that are, and they carry the baggage all through. Now, per research by different organizations, India has on an average around 180 million LGBTIQ people. Out of that, 43 million people belong to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, which have been more persecuted and constitutionally acknowledged as being economically, socially, politically, and religiously backward because of the lack of rights for thousands of years. And it has also been reported that their income level is about 30% lower than the national average. So there is definitely a significant gap in research, advocacy, programming with respect to the double vulnerability these communities experience as an LGBTIQ individual as well as a lower caste person. Now, as I mentioned, I had to face caste discrimination early on in my life. There are words that people use like chamar, bhangi, etc. These are used by people as insults. These are actually caste identities of people belonging to scheduled castes and tribes. At at my graduation college, the discrimination started when the professor walked into the classroom and asked that all scheduled caste and scheduled tribe students stand up in the very first interaction with us. So my grandfather, I told him about that, and he's a very well known in the anti-caste movement, well known name in the anti-caste movement. He told me never to feel ashamed of my identity. That gave me strength, and then I countered this caste slurs quite well after that, and I managed around that. Now, uh, my grandfather used to be the head of his village, hence Chaudhary as a surname stuck to me. It usually in North India, any Dalit name starts to end with a Ram, so that the high caste people's mouths are purified after they utter our name. So, and Ram is a god in Hinduism. So they either prefix or suffix it. But because of that particular position that my grandfather held as head of his village, that Chaudhary surname came in, which kind of covered my caste identity. And that has been there. We have been seeing that trend now as well. People are covering their caste identities by using other surnames because they know that surnames are markers of their caste. So they are using other surnames by which the caste are not giving away. Now, I came out to myself during my college time, and thankfully, I found a support system, which is the Humsafar Trust, and I've always been grateful for them for their support to me and many others. That is when I discovered that there that to manage double discrimination is a very difficult piece to manage. I had to leave my second job as my boss was both caste phobic and homophobic, and organization didn't provide me any support to navigate that situation. Then I joined a very inclusive company called GP Solutions Private Limited. They are based out of Clark, New Jersey, and they were very open and accommodating. I came out to the founder, Rupa Makija, and she empathized and told me that she would do her best for me and others from non-binary gender identities and sexual orientations to feel belonged and included at her workplace. Now, she gave me the mandate to develop the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging within the organization globally. That is when the entire diversity inclusion journey for me started. I still did not come out as Dalit to her. It was much later that I did because still I was more, I was deeply down. I was more stigmatized. I didn't know how she would take it. And when I came out to her as Dalit, she actually said you should have told me earlier. We could have actually started something for the racial minorities as well for their inclusion in the workplace. So she was very much open to the idea. Now I then went on to work with another very inclusive company called Kellogg's, based out of Michigan. As a they were GP's consulting client, and I met the amazing Deborah Quaid, who manages supply diversity globally. I have been a supply chain professional all my life, and she laid the entire foundation of supply diversity on top of the diversity inclusion work which I was doing. She introduced me to the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, NGLCC, and other diversity chamber of commerces. And I was amazed at how the concept of inclusion, equity, belonging can positively impact the top line and bottom line of businesses. So both Rupa and Deborah have been amazing mentors throughout and made me feel belonged at work, helped me in learning how I can give back to the community by developing diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging, and supply diversity skill set in me, and then created a very conducive environment for me to work in as well. So after Kellogg, I joined a small business that my maternal grandfather had put up and ensured that while expanding it, the concepts of all of these are enshrined in everything that we do. Now, in parallel, I started working with like-minded individuals like the Humsafar Trust and other organizations and people in organizing the Mumbai Pride March, uh, Rainbow Voices Mumbai, which is India's first LGBTIQ choir, and other initiatives. Now, that gave me a sense of very deep fulfillment, learning, and acceptance. During these last 14 years, I have realized that while a lot has been done with respect to human rights for the queer population, LGBTIQ plus population in India, not much has been touched upon when it comes to enable the queer population professionally or economically. Now, this was echoed by 8 other amazing friends and acquaintances whom I met in these 14 years, and I'm fortunate that we decided to create a support system which works collaboratively to educate, enable, and empower LGBTIQ plus small businesses, working professionals, students, at the same time sensitizes corporates, helps them with their policies and diversity hiring initiatives. We are also we are also the economic voice of the community to the government, and we are speaking with them about policy changes uh, and how to include the LGBTIQ plus small businesses within their procurement portfolio, and also making some policy related advisory. We launched Samavesh Chamber of Commerce to that effect last year as a Section 8 nonprofit entity. We wanted to do it 10 years earlier, but with the 2014 judgment of the Supreme Court criminalizing homosexuality again, the plans got stalled. So we launched it last year. Our vision at Samavesh is to co-create a very safe and inclusive business ecosystem for the LGBTIQ community, as well as provide equity and support to the LGBT folks who are having a double marginalization. Either they are scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or people with disability, etc. So we are part of the NGLCC Global Networks, Canadian Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, Equal Asia Foundation, Disability in, and other local and global networks, because we feel that only when we collaborate and cooperate, inclusion, diversity, equity, and belonging are driven, and impact is magnified. So these platforms that we come on and we kind of talk about the chamber as well as our own intersectionalities are very important in the fact that we are able to talk to our allies and bring forth the challenges that we have faced as well as the LGBTIQ folks themselves to make them understand that there are more intersectionalities that we all carry and there are innate biases that we need to overcome and we need to yield those privileges. But thank you for the opportunity, Ben. I'm sorry it was a very long answer, but I thought that I would give you a perspective of where that entire journey started from.
You do not need to apologize for that, Kanishka. We appreciate hearing that journey. It's an important and impressive one. And I guess I would do a follow-up question immediately. But I think let's hold it and just think about this. To me, it struck me that your journey included a lot of sort of an international routing, including by moving on to a US company after having met with discrimination at an Indian company, and that now your work is really international in scope. So that's an interesting angle for me, and I would like to explore that a little bit more. So not to belabor on Kanishka, thank you again. If you don't mind, let's turn to your fellow panelist, and that is, we'll start with Shivangi Agarwal. Shivangi is a disabled queer activist and artist who works with a collective called Determined Art Movement, or DAM. She works as a consultant, researcher, writer, advisor, and facilitator with an emphasis on advocacy for disability, sexuality, gender, and accessibility. Shivangi, hello.
Hi, Ben.
Nice
Hi.
to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for having me, for the US consulate and Koyal, Ben, everyone who's here, my fellow panelists, for having me. And I really want to thank Kanishka, especially for such an amazing speech. And I feel honored to follow that. So thank you.
Good, thank you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Determined Art Movement and maybe go a little further. Listen, we understand the unique interests and concerns of those with disabilities. They're often overlooked in broader society. But what about among the LGBTQI plus community? How does the LGBTQI plus community respond to the concerns of the disabled community? Can you give us a sense for the dynamic of where the interests of the one community and the other overlap and perhaps are either exacerbated or ignored or even supported? Thank you.
Right, so I'll start by introducing a little bit about like Determined Art Movement and a little bit about like me and how I practice my art. So I'm a queer and disabled activist. So I have physical disabilities, and I have mental illness, and I also have chronic illness, and I'm also queer. So I've always questioned my sexuality, but recently I've also started questioning my gender. In fact, I'm questioning the whole concept of gender in itself. And I think it's been a very interesting journey for me. I've played many different like roles. I've done many different things. I used to actually, like, after graduating from high school in India, I actually lived in the US for 6 years, and that's where I learned the core of my activism and even the art that I practice. So I started writing when I was a very young disabled kid, and since then I've always been involved in art. When I was in the US, I started painting on big surfaces like walls or prosthetics and wheelchairs. And then recently I've started creating a lot of scenes. And these are all things that I've mostly done with people, with friends, and with my with children, or with co-workers and things like that. I didn't grow up with like art around me. I didn't always relate to art because I feel it was inaccessible for people with disabilities, and and especially for those who are from my community. We don't study, like we didn't none of like there's not a lot of disabled artists or writers that we often hear about. Well, there is Helen Keller, who is a very prominent writer, but we don't hear about writers and disabled writers from different intersectionalities, who are either Black or brown in race, or who are from marginalized caste, or who are from marginalized religions. And so I think this is a perfect platform to address that intersectionality. And for me, like, I would say that art exists in my imagination. It came to me from a place of survival, desperation, and wanting to be heard and wanting to be visible. I think wanting to connect to, wanting to have a community around, having to show something for that I'm actually working on. So I usually do, so Determined Art Movement is usually like community-based paintings. It involves creative expression through dance, music, writing, spiritual healing, and support groups led by and for disabled and queer people. So the biggest focus that I feel like we need to put, the leadership should come from people from the intersections instead of people who already have a lot of privilege. So I think this is one of the things that we've dealt with a lot in India, where most of the disability organizations are led by able-bodied, able-minded people, and or they're led by family members, caregivers of people with disabilities. So there is a lack of representation in terms of leadership. Like there is people with disabilities are not believed that people don't believe that we can be leaders. We have a voice, that we can be seen, and that we are capable of knowing what we want. So for me, art is a way to question these forms of question and challenge like social justice issues, and really address like collective liberation, collective accessibility, and also we also do a lot of live documentation of our narratives and of our radical thoughts and dreams, because a lot of times we don't get spaces where we can even talk about our dreams, let alone be fully involved in the workplace. So I would say that's something that Determined Art Movement does. And in terms of like the queer movement, I think that disabled and queer lives are very similar in terms of like I always talk about bodies a lot, and I think bodies are very are like our topic is a subject area which I think that covers queerness and disability. So in those terms, we can come together and question laws and policies and housing and economic rights, because disabled people also face the similar issues where we are not able to get housing, we are not able to live independently, we are not able to organize independently, and like and so I think those are one of the things. And then I think I relate a lot to my trans siblings, because as I said, the body aspect is very important. So one of the theories in disability spaces and disability studies is the models of disability, and like medical model of disability is one of the most prominent one, which even the government of India follows in their policies and in their laws and everything. The kinds of just the medical model of disability is basically like looking at the disability as the problem which needs to be fixed, and it's the focus is again like on the impairment and not the person themselves. So I think even like when we think about transness and how that relates to like physical space and like in medical, like especially in medical spaces, transness is often medicalized, and it's often like thought of in a way which which is something that needs to be altered, which needs to be fixed, and so it's very similar in disability. And I think access to spaces is one of the biggest challenges for people with disabilities, because often like we are not able to access restaurants and movie theaters. We are not able to access airports. We are not able to access transportations, and we are almost like violently denied our spaces. We are confined. We have been living in a perpetual pandemic as disabled people, like because we don't have access. And so I think a lot of trans and queer people would also relate to that, where access is denied. Right? At the airport, there is the security which questions the gender. The gendered security is like a very it's questioned, and it's the same in disability. Like when I go on in a wheelchair, like it's always like a specific, it's a very specific way in which I have to enter the airport, and how able people enter the airport. So and that's in every space. So I think those are some of the challenges I would see that are like common in the queer and disability community. And in terms of like how the queer community, how the queer movement in India has been in relation to people with disabilities, I would say that we are still working on demanding accessibility and collective access. Like I said, collective liberation and collective access is are the things that we are trying to work towards. Thank you.
Thank you, Shivangi. That's a lot to take in, and it's obviously a lifelong challenge, and it's good for our audience to hear this so that we can sort of adapt our thinking and better understand what it is that you're up against. I'm trying to put together a picture of how the various communities are supporting each other through their intersection, and it's not come quite clear to me. So maybe a little further on we can look more deeply at that. I will say, as far as your painting goes, it's always good to talk to an artist, and I probably should have started out with that, because I have a deep and abiding appreciation for artists, and that's me personally, and I like to be in a position from the consulate to be able to support the art community. I feel like in some ways that's yet another area of struggle for a lot of people. But I took my sons to the skate park in Bandra a few weeks ago, and it's painted there very beautifully, and it kind of makes the park what it is. And so painting and altering our physical spaces is super important, and I see a role for that. that artists do and are not appreciated for. So thank you for being an artist. Let me just say that. Okay. And then let's move along. Let's go to our next panelist. I'm struggling with my notes here, but I did want to talk to Faraz for a little bit. So Faraz, first of all, congratulations on the recognition and acclaim that your film Shir Korma is receiving. I feel like every time I turn around, you've acquired further accolades, and now the number is up to 60. I'll get to that in a minute, but I guess I've skipped my introductory notes. Here we are. Faraz is best known as an international award-winning non-binary queer independent filmmaker. Their film, Sisak, India's first silent LGBTQI+ love story, is the first Indian film to win 60 international awards. Mabruk. Their most recent film, Shir Korma, which deals with intersectionalities of sexuality, gender, identities, faith, and love, has become the first ever Indian film to win Frameline, the biggest queer film festival in the world, and BAFTA. When not working, and qualifying it for BAFTA, I should say. When not working behind the camera, Faraz leads cinema and theater sessions for underprivileged children across slums of Mumbai and conducts free acting workshops for Indian, transgender, and queer communities. Faraz, always good to see you. Hello.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for the lovely introduction, and I'm so glad to be on this panel. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I wonder if Shivangi had a hand in painting that beautiful jacket.
Actually, that jacket has been designed by me. I've just launched a brand that really supports and celebrates artists from across India. And
Wow.
it just, yeah, because the pandemic has hit the artists in the community quite hard. So I launched this brand to support really many artists from various communities in India and sort of to put them into the spotlight using my privilege that I have, whatever little privilege that I have to be able to utilize that and to really hero art in that sense.
Very good. All right, thanks. Let's get into a question before we go to the film, or if we even get to the film. There's so many questions already stacking up, and I do want to give our audience their chance. And I appreciate our audience for their curiosity and their interest and the questions that are coming in. So please keep those coming by putting your Q&A in the chat box. But meanwhile, here with Faraz, tell me how your identities as queer and as a Muslim interact. What does it mean in terms of your experiences in the personal and professional life to come out and be openly queer in India? And is this any different for someone who is an openly queer Muslim in India? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Ben. I think I really find myself questioning all the identities many a times myself, because at times you just want to exist, you just want to be, you just want to celebrate who you are. And many a times these identities really, and I think it's the world outside that constantly keeps on reminding you of your identities through and through. It's every time I enter a room, I'm reminded of my identity of being an openly queer person. And then when I speak my name out loud, I'm reminded of my identity as a Muslim. And then the question comes, how can you be queer and Muslim? And I think to be able to let people know that there is a place for everyone in this world. And if I can exist, so can you. And that's been really my identity. I think the fact that I can exist, I can claim space for myself, I can create safe spaces for many Farazes in India or across the globe right now, who have always wanted to have someone to really look up to. I grew up in the 90s, Ben. I had zero representation of any the queer individuals in media and so on and so forth. And when I decided to become a storyteller, when I decided to become a filmmaker, my priority was then to be able to put my identity onto the screen, to leave behind a legacy of happy queer people. It's so important for generations of the queer children that are going to come to be able to look up to media, to be able to celebrate ourselves by saying, if they can be happy, so can we. I think there is so much of trauma attached to being a queer individual. I think I want to not deny that trauma, but also I want to open up a new narrative, a narrative of love, a narrative of acceptance, a narrative of happiness. And I think to have happy queer adults on screen in cinema, being people of the color, being non-binary, to utilize their faiths and their gender identities and their sexualities, and to use these intersectionalities in a way that we've never really seen before. I think that's where my identity really flourishes. My identity as a queer, non-binary Muslim, the person uh, um, of color. So I think that's where I am. I think my identity has helped me to be who I am. It has helped me to emerge in telling the stories that have never really been championed in a cinema. It's a question I was asked last week by a journalist in America when I was doing an interview for Frameline, and they asked me, they said, why did you make a film on the queer Muslim women and non-binary the characters? And I said, when was the last time you saw a film on queer Muslim women? The queer brown Muslim women. When was the last time we've seen a film? We've never really seen a film. In Indian cinema, um, when was the last time we had seen a progressive Muslim family? And given the amount of rising Islamophobia that has been, depicted, continues to be depicted in cinema and media, my film comes as a breath of fresh air. Nobody in my film lives in a home with green colored walls. Nobody has to keep reminding the audiences that they're not a terrorist. Nobody has to, all these particular stereotypes that exist around Muslim identities. I'm trying to sort of address those, along with addressing my sexuality and gender identities. So it's a very interesting space to be in. It's a very new space to be in, because you're really trying to, at the end of it all, you're trying to make a film and a film has to, by all means, remain entertaining. It has to talk to people across the spectrum, whether you're sitting in Kansas or whether you're in a Kanpur. It has to talk to everyone. So to be able to bring forward these narratives of intersectionality and also to keep it universal at the same time has been a learning curve for me. And I think I'm really excited for to be able to be here and to be able to create cinema, because I understand that to be able to be a filmmaker is to be in a place of a privilege. To be able to even speak in English, the language that we are talking in, is a thing of privilege. And I think it's very important to keep recognizing a privilege and sort of addressing it as we go move forward, because I think in this journey of queerness, in this journey of identities, it's very imperative to address our privileges as we move through it.
Okay, Faraz, thank you. I'm just jotting down a few notes here. And this is the part where I have to take a quick break and say to everybody, I'm no Oprah Winfrey. This is not my my strongest role is playing as moderator. So you'll have to bear with me as I try to pull all these disparate threads together. But I'm hearing a couple of things that run steady throughout this discussion, and this idea, Faraz, that you raised of privilege, I think is an important one to explore. And we may not be able to get to it here, and I'll see what our audience has to say about it. But I thank you for bringing that up, because it's truly a side of this question that matters. The idea of journey of identity is also important. You mentioned questioning your identity. You mentioned stepping outside, and that's when the world reminds you to kind of question and think about your identity. Which is something that Shivangi also said. She talked about her the aspect of the transition and change and questioning identity and gender identity. I put that in the context of the size of the problem, not the problem, of the size of the question, which is, at the beginning, Kanishka raised numbers, and he talked about how India counts 180 million LGBTQI plus members. And who knows, maybe that's an undercount, but that's a lot of people. And of them, 40, I think I heard 40 million being low caste. I don't know what the numbers look like for Muslim. I know it's the largest minority in the country. Faraz, can you remind us the number of Muslims in India?
I wouldn't know the number of Muslims. Wrong. Never really done my R&D on it, and I feel embarrassed about it. But I think definitely a minority. It continues to be a minority in India, and that is 100%, for sure.
Um, and then I think you could look at another number here and ask about disabled persons and how many Indians are dealing with various aspects of disability, including mental illness and other things that we don't see, learning disabilities, and then of course, physical disabilities. So we're talking about a lot of populations that cut across segments. I have not driven myself to a pure question here. But it strikes me that given the size of this, the large scope of this question, looking to the international community is important. And, raising questions of identity around the world is probably a part of the solution. So as I promised, I want to go back to Kanishka, and I think I'll take it up where I left off, which was to ask a little bit about your exploration, your professional journey, if I recall it correctly, took you from an Indian company where you experienced a great deal of discrimination and then you found some more openness in an international community. If I have that right, please affirm. If I have it wrong, go ahead and correct me. But can you talk a little bit about the international aspect of searching for acceptance as an LGBTQI plus and lower caste person? Thank you, Kanishka.
Sure, Ben, thanks. So the company that I left because of homophobia and caste phobia, incidentally, it was the US MNC who had an office in India, but they did have global policies that were not translated locally for the LGBTIQ folks. So there was a struggle there. And that was like, 14 years ago. That was a long time ago. The Delhi High Court judgment hadn't come in. They were very set, but they were definitely caste phobic. Even if they didn't understand LGBTIQ, they definitely understood caste. So they were both caste phobic and homophobic. But yes, that interaction with and that experience internationally really took me to a world where I found that my identity is just one part of me, and there's so much more to me to explore. So, and when I was given an opportunity to interact with support groups, with like-minded individuals, etc., I figured that I tried to understand more about the different intersectionalities between the LGBTIQ spectrum, because for that itself was a learning, and that was I was never out on the circle before that. Was never as in on the social circle. I never had any queer friends, any LGBTIQ friends, and that is when I started making those associations. And I even professionally, when we had the supply diversity program running, we had different chambers from different minority organizations certifying their businesses, and I was given a mandate to procure from them, given XYZ different factors if they check the box there. Now, that clearly showed me that there is definitely an economic enablement that we are creating for these minority segments, and it was not based on a kind of a quota system, but it was more so on a competency basis. And I found that all of these minority businesses were more nimble, were more forthcoming, were more innovative, were there for the organization when it most needed them, and they were able to turn around solutions quite fast. So that was the experience that I had. And of course, uh, when Kellogg's and GP and the other clients that I had in the US, they already had those pronounced policies in place. They had ERGs, which they now call BERGs, belonging ERGs, and so on and so forth. So I had a lot of learning from there. But at the same time, when it came to caste, whenever I met parents of my friends, they wanted to implore that what is your surname, even though my friends knew what they were saying, and they had to ask them to just quiet down. but their parents would want to know what caste do I belong to, where do I come from, which was a question I was very much used to in India, but not in the US, not in Australia, not in Europe, because I thought that is the baggage we have already left behind. Why bring it here? So, but thankfully, my friends were quite understanding and they kind of sensitized their parents about it. And I had been out and proud both uh, as a gay person as well as a Dalit later on. I came out as Dalit much later on, as I mentioned. I came out as a gay person much earlier because I was more afraid of the stigma, or deep down, I had this fear of coming out. It might affect my professional life uh, as well, like it did in my second job, because at that point in time, my manager stopped my promotion for 6 straight months. And I complained to the HR and everything. Nothing happened. There was no support system. And when I wrote to the US counterparts, that is when they took action. But by that time, I had lost my interest. I didn't have a supportive environment, so I had to leave the organization. And yeah, that was pretty much the experience. And those are the learnings and those are the associations that helped me later when I came back to India to try to see uh, what we can do to translate that benefit onto others, because that was a privilege for me to go there. And can I convert that privilege and into actionable items that help others, into creating solutions that help others. So, and that is when I met those 8 different individuals, and they were thinking quite the same thing, because they were traveling across the world, or they were doing a lot of solid work on the ground here in the country. So when we met, we clicked, and then we said, okay, let's do this. I hope that answers your question, Ben.
Yeah, no, it does. And I hope that it gave you the bandwidth to talk a little bit about how Samavish actually works and implements their goals. I will ask the 8 members, are they all LGBTQI plus persons? Are they all low caste persons? Because I want to be respectful of time, if you could treat that question fairly, um, you know, quickly without, I'm not want to rush you too much. And I do have to play that hard role of, let's move it along, but because I do want to get to some of these audience questions, but I think I put 2 things on your plate, a little bit concretely about what Samavish does, and to sort of the company you keep as part of that organization. Thank you.
Sure, I'll be very quick with that. So, Samavesh educates, empowers, and enables both LGBTIQ plus individuals as well as corporates. Corporates into sensitizing them, into writing the inclusive policies, etc., into their hiring practices. Uh, Individuals into capacity building and getting those right fit into the organization, and small businesses, LGBTIQ plus small businesses, and providing them access and opportunity. Now, we do this by way of collaboration. We are part of the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, CGLCC, etc. So we do a lot of cross-border information interchange. Uh, Members get an opportunity to get access to businesses outside who would seek the services, and so on and so forth. Either ways, it goes across the countries. Now, on the board, we have 3 founders and we have 6 co-founder, 6 advisory board, and it is a very diverse organization. We have allies as well as people from the community. The allies are only 10%. The only person who is from a low caste background is me. The rest are all high caste. But then at the same time, we have a good amount of uh, trans representation, women representation, female representation on the board.
Thanks. That's so helpful. And I think it's useful. And I like to see that diversity uh, cropping up everywhere. And we look to explore opportunities for diversity here at the consulate as well. So thank you for that, Kanishka. It's very useful. Let's go back over to Shivangi, if you don't mind. I wanted to follow up with you on the question of the folks with learning disabilities and other invisible forms of disability, and how their challenges are less recognized and harder to spot. And so how they struggle to integrate, and what pressures they face on the back end from broader society. Thank you.
Yeah, I think like learning disabilities, people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental illnesses, all of these are like invisible disabilities. And I think it shouldn't matter that we are invisible. It shouldn't matter that these disabilities or these communities are invisible. I think it's important to not just like open our movements in terms of like opening our movements to queer people with disabilities, with visible disabilities, but also opening our homes and opening our personal spaces uh, to people with disabilities in general. Like I think that's very important because there is a lot of like lack of personal interaction, like between wanting to like demanding accessibility and like opening up movements, but then like not really interacting with us in a personal space. And I think that makes it like very difficult because as a kid, like I hardly had any friends, and people I think it's easier for people to understand the issues that someone, for example, with learning disabilities has, but is by learning, by being friends with them, by going on dates with them, by having sex with them and things like that, you know, because even within learning disabilities there are so many varieties, there are so many different ways that people adapt, you know, that so many ways that people, different ways that people need access. And so it's this disability is a vast, it's a vast topic. I mean, I'm just like one person representing maybe one disability, but there are so many disabilities. There are deaf people, there are people with autism that are just coming up now, like who are talking about the issues they are facing, because till now, as I said before, uh, caregivers and family members of people who have autism are the ones who have been prominent, and often those are the those are the people, sometimes, often, especially in queer, when it comes to queerness and autism, in fact, if you read, there's a lot of literature now about how queerness, like gender identity and autism is like interconnected. So a lot of people with autism are coming out as trans and queer and non-binary. Uh, so I think that is only possible if people who have autism themselves, who have learning disabilities themselves, speak out instead of their family members or caregivers, who are often our abusers. You know, people, especially when, because they don't understand our our gender decisions, our body decisions, and all of those things. They often become our abusers because as I said, like sometimes our parents don't allow us to go out into the world, and you know, they threaten us with like, oh, this is we are concerned about your safety and things like that, and that really shuts us out from the world, and kind of stops us from making friends and addressing the issues that we are concerned about. Because, you know, I feel like parents of people with disabilities have very different issues, right? Like their issues are definitely very relevant and very real. But I think for me, I think that leadership from disabled people is very important. And I think also for people like with learning disabilities. So I recently wrote like a blog or an article with an organization called Women Enabled about special schools. So I think that special schools or special education is a topic very common when it comes to learning disabilities. It's often, special education is often separated from the quote unquote normal education, or the whatever is. So it's like special education is a different, it's a form of is separating us, you know. It's like and it's the same with physical disabilities. If you see like our entrances, the physical spaces, in terms of washrooms and like all of these things are separated from the norm, and so I wrote about that, how that like it like restricts the imagination of how we can collectivize, of how we can come together, because that is the, I think, like I said, friendship, dating, all of these things, like we if we don't uh, have the intercaste or interdisability, inter religion, religious conversations, there is no way for us to understand each other. And I think and that's also that starts from the beginning, right? Like from the schooling, from when we have started our schools, like when we are going to schools, when we're going to our homes, and we're talking to our parents. And I think it's important that it starts from there, and that it's normalized and challenged right there, because ableism, like challenging ableism, is something, it's the same as challenging gender, because um, gender is like a construct, and race is also a construct. All these things are a construct, and so is like disability, ability is a construct, where you think of, where you say, if you say like one person is able to do this, but they might look like they might be able to, like for example, my mother, I can talk about my mother. Like I often, like I can climb stairs, but my mother, like who is able bodied, she struggles with climbing stairs because she has knee pain, a lot of knee pain. So it's it's a construct, because like we see a person and we think that they're able bodied, but it's not always true. Like and I think it's an assumption that we always have. And even with people with learning disabilities, I think there are so many accommodations that need to be made, that need to be steps that need to be taken, where they are more visible, their invisible disability is more visible. And I think it's only possible if we organize together, if we work together, and yeah, and we question like a, a lot of like the ways that even desire works, how which bodies are desired, which bodies are less desired. And challenging, like I said before, the reframing the medical concepts. Like it's not like when you think of learning disabilities, you instantly think of the medical, what is in in the brain, what is the thing that needs to be fixed, or what is the thing that is wrong, or and you instantly think of the medicalizing disability is a very, very common thing which happens. And that's when we medicalize it, that's how all of the policies are then framed. So it's very important to challenge those.
I think, thank you for this. And what I think I take away from it is essentially that, society has built itself in such a way that it separates all the categories that it can, especially distinguishing people with disabilities, making it more difficult for, so-called able people to understand them, and also for people with disabilities to understand living within the able-bodied world. So it's a challenge that hasn't been addressed from the societal level, and that might be an interesting way forward, as opposed to medicalizing it. I do appreciate hearing that, and I hope I've drawn it together. Shivangi, thank you. Let me take one more question of our own for Faraz before I get to this barrage of questions. I'll put it together for you, Faraz, because I know your film brings out at least one of the main character anyway, makes a point to share their pronouns when introducing themselves. And I'm wondering why you included that in the film. And I think take it one step further. I understand that you've sort of been subjected to hate mail, people expressing misogyny, Islamophobia, homophobia, these kinds of things. If you don't mind telling us a little bit about your film, why your characters introduce themselves as they do, and what it's led to for you personally. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Ben. I also want to address one thing before I move forward. I do have learning disabilities, and for a longest time, growing up in India in the 90s, my learning disability was not recognized. And I was sent to therapy, and I was sent to, these camps where I was forced to learn things that I was unable to learn. And it was only when I traveled to the United States for the first time, and I actually ended up, the first thing I wanted to do was go see a doctor for myself and be like, why do I have this difficulty at learning? There are certain things that, I mean, the letters kept on dancing for me all the time, and there was no answer to to that. And it was only when I went to the US, and then they said, hey, you have dyslexia, and it's cool. And I also had ADHD, which also it's not recognized as a disability, sadly, but it should be recognized as a disability. And I'm very strongly going to be opening um, a conversation about disability in the mainstream in my next film, because I think it's very imperative to talk about that as well. Coming back to my film, the reason my protagonist in the film introduces themselves using their pronouns is, I think it's very important to understand is that gender is not how one looks, but how one feels. And the minute you walk inside a room, people immediately want to put you inside a box. They want to immediately put you inside a binary to feel comfortable for themselves. They want to place a finger on you. um, I think we've evolved so much, and we are evolving so much given the world that we're living in. um, it's imperative to, as we move forward, to become more sensitive, to become more internal. And I think in our journey of being more progressive, in our journey of being more global, in our journey of being more sensitive to one another, it's also imperative to talk about gender, because I think gender is really a spectrum. I mean, if to be able to identify someone regarding their gender on how they look is not fair. And therefore in my film, when the characters misgendered, they really stand up for themselves, and they say, my pronouns are they them, and I identify as non-binary. 2 years back, I did not identify as non-binary, Ben. I identify as non-binary now. So my journey with my gender has been a journey as well. And I think it's imperative. It's very interesting, and I want to talk about this, the amount of the prejudices that are thrown about appearances and gender. I recently reached out to a film festival in Europe. I'm not going to name them, but they were very adamant about the fact that I cannot be non-binary because I have facial hair. And this email went on back and forth of me really standing up for myself and saying, but I do identify as non-binary. They were like, yeah, but you are very masculine presenting. And I said, there are no rules to being non-binary. If a person identifies as non-binary, you really need to listen to people. First of all, I think if we just start listening to one another, we'll we'll have a better world. And I think that is the need of the hour, to be able to listen to one another, to be able to say, okay, I believe you. If that's your truth, that's your truth. I will respect that. And I think that is very imperative. Talking about the hate that Sheer Korma has been receiving, it's really, I mean, we did expect hate to come. I won't deny that. And I initially, me and my team, we really thought the hate would be, related to homophobia. But interestingly, the hate has been so multidimensional. It's not just from the homophobes, it's also from the Islamophobes, it's also from people within the queer community who are deeply misogynistic. And it's really sad to say this, but the queer community continues to be misogynistic in India. They continue to be Islamophobic. They're also deeply femphobic, for that matter. Anyone who is the presenting a femme side, they are, the amount of phobia that I face every day. And my film really champions all of this. My film champions a non-binary individual. champions a Muslim family. It champions Urdu as a dying language in India. It really celebrates all these intersectionalities, really, which has really garnered less support for my film, given the fact that it's about minorities and minorities and minorities. So the hate is not just from the homophobes, but the Islamophobes, the misogynistic folks out there who've been really targeting my film. One very interesting thing, my film premiered in June this year at Frameline in San Francisco. But somewhere earlier in March, a friend of mine brought this to my notice. They said that, have you checked the IMDb page of your film? And I said, no, I haven't, because my film hasn't released. Why should I? They were like, but you should, because people are rating your film already. And I said, what? But they haven't even, nobody has seen the film. And then I log into my IMDb page and I see that the film has got a rating of 2.9 on 10. So people went ahead and they started rating the film even without watching the film. And there is no way to make sense of this hate. It is so rampant. It's just present, and it just comes from a place of saying that, how dare you champion this, how dare you to give voice in the mainstream to this, how dare you put a spotlight on this. And my answer to that is always, Sheer Korma is a love letter to hate. If you are a hater, this is a love letter to you. No matter what your hatred, no matter what your prejudice is, no matter how deep your prejudice runs, this is a love letter for you. So the fact that people are being so bothered by just seeing Muslim queer people on screen, they're just getting riled up by just seeing our presence. That speaks volumes of how far we really have to go in our journey of inclusion, in our journey of acceptance. I think nobody is free until all of us are free, and I feel very strongly about that, especially after having been working with the trans community. It's always about the cis, the gay men in the LGBTQIA spectrum. Where are the queer women? Where are the non-binary folks? Where are the trans folks? This community is LGBTQIA plus. Where are the rest? Why is it always about the cis, queer, gay, upper middle class men in India? There is a massive community it was Marsha P. Johnson who had to throw a brick at Stonewall. And I keep reminding this to people over and over again, that it took a trans woman of color to start this movement on, to open up this whole Pride March. And I think the reason why we celebrate Pride today across the world was for a trans person of the color who had the courage to really step up, to the system and really claim space for themselves. So I feel, I don't think I have done anything as huge as Masha did back in the day, but I feel Sheer Korma is a drop in that ocean towards championing underrepresented communities, especially in cinema.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Faraz. I was reminded in your remarks about an interview I heard with a Pakistani journalist who lived, I think, somewhere in one of the Scandinavian countries and was receiving hate mail, and decided to sit down with the people that were basically neo-Nazis, white supremacists. And at first they were, of course, afraid to do so. And then finally, her journey led her across to engage with some folks of that nature, even in the US. And basically, they began to realize that what she had to say to them was, they couldn't say to her what they said about her. They couldn't say to her face. And so she considered her work to be almost a love letter. And so I see your message to the people who spew hate your way, that this is a love letter to them, because I think that's really the way forward here. Is we need to kind of not push back, but just keep on putting our message out there and treat the world with love and as we want to be treated. So thank you for that. I'm not trying to be preachy. There are so many questions here that I need to turn to, and they're good ones. I don't know where to start, but I do know folks wanted to hear from Kanishka about a couple of things. And maybe I'll just read a few quickly and you can take this where you want to go. Kanishka, folks are asking, Geeta asked about specific challenges that LGBTQI employees face in the workplace in India. And also Padmini had asked about, the difference between what you're experiencing when it comes to heterosexual men, especially in India, who are more resistant to the LGBTQI community than heterosexual women, who seem to be more empathetic and inclusive. So those 2 points, if you could take them forward for us. Thank you, Kanishka.
Sure, Ben, thanks. And, I think part of it is already being answered by my two co-panelists, so I'll just add on to that. Uh, for the kind of challenges that people face, people of minority, be it LGBTIQ plus or other minorities faces, of course, lack of policies. So that is a common thing that is there in India. There are not much, no, all inclusive policies in place. Benefits, employee benefits. Though that is the second thing. There is not much sensitization that is there within their staff when they hire a diversity candidate. So a person who doesn't feel belonged will not be productive as much as they would like them to be. And then that person will either drop their productivity, will rather drop to a certain level, and they will leave to a more better organization which is more inclusive, or they will continue being there, and if they are not out, then that creates mental health issues for them as well. So that is another thing. So these are the kind of challenges that an LGBT person faces. Also, gender neutral bathrooms and the necessary infrastructure, and also, I'll leave that to Shivangi to talk about the disabled bathrooms that are there. But then for gender neutral bathrooms, they are not there. So even though corporates want to be all inclusive, but when they hear about the kind of work that goes into it, even from an infrastructure wise, they take some time. I would not say they step back. They do take some time to think, because it requires some investment from them. So these are the kind of challenges. Plus, of course, there's a career progression of an individual, the entire employee life cycle, the mentoring part, the succession plans, etc., etc. So if they're all non-biased, and there is an executive level sponsor, executive vice president, or somebody who sponsors inclusion and diversity within the organization, that really helps, so that people can look up to them, and then, if there are any issues, they can bring them forth. That is also lacking, but then it is getting developed. So these are the ones that are primarily there. And of course, lack of sensitization. So can't expect our fellow employees not to ask us how was your weekend, and and all of those questions, which makes employees cover because they are not out. And if they're sensitized, then they won't ask these questions, or perhaps they'll be more open to understand, oh, I was with my boyfriend, or I was with my girlfriend, or I'm bisexual. I was having a nice movie date with my boyfriend or girlfriend. So all of those kind of things, they have to be normalized by sensitization. So sensitization is definitely missing. And sorry, what was the second part of the question, Ben? I'm sorry, I just lost that.
With, have you experienced different, well, the question makes assumptions, but I suppose they're not incorrect. Your experience, have you found that heterosexual men, especially in India, are more resistant to LGBTQI community than heterosexual women? So men versus women, who seems to embrace the community or not, in your experience?
Personally, I haven't seen much difference, though I understand the fact that females have been more like this deep misogynist patriarchal setup that we have in India. Women understand more about being diverse and being out of the entire conversation than men who are more privileged. But personally, I haven't found heterosexual men to be less understanding than heterosexual females. I have friends in both. In fact, I actually corrected one of my friends who introduced me as a gay best friend. I said, listen, I'm your friend. I'm not your gay best friend. Being gay is just one part of me. There's so much to me than other things.
Thank you. Okay. You know what? I'm going to take this next question to Faraz, and then I have a question for Shivangi after that. And by the way, if any of you are not comfortable with the questions, then please pass. And I think that that's fair, but this did not seem to be too problematic. Sukanya has asked of Faraz, how can religion be used, especially Islam, to pass on the message of acceptance of the LGBTQI plus community? I wonder if it even can be. That's my my add-on, but I think that's a really good question. How can you use religion as a force for good in your cause? Thank
Thank you for your question. I think one of the reasons that I think the reason I made Sheer Korma is exactly to answer this question, is to be able to show the progressive Muslim families who are accepting of their children. I come from a progressive Muslim family. My mother offers namaz 5 times a day, and she also has a queer child who's non-binary now. And I think for her to have had that journey is really representative of so many Muslim families across the globe who have queer children who have embraced them. I think it's important, therefore, to be able to have these conversations and to be able to champion these stories that really talk about a different identity of Muslims. I think when you look at Islam itself has been misrepresented to such a uh, point. I have read the Quran, and I have really I think to go back also is to also understand very deeply that the Quran has been translated by a lot of men, and when you talk about translations, you cannot take away the the patriarchy, the apparent patriarchy that has been used in the translations, over the centuries. And when you read a progressive translations of the Holy Quran by women Islamic scholars, you'd be surprised to read the amount of acceptance that there is, And this is something that I also very deeply believe in. Prophet Muhammad was someone who really stood up for the underrepresented. If Prophet Muhammad was here today to be able to speak for himself, he would definitely hold hands with the queer people and support them and not discard them. And this is my belief, and this is the belief of my family and many other Muslims across the globe who believe in inclusion, who believe in acceptance. My faith is my journey with my God, and nobody else has any say in that. And that really is what Islam is about. But I think to be able to understand that, one has to come from a place of love, one has to come from a place of acceptance. And I think Sheer Korma, my existence in the world, my existence on this panel is trying to champion that, really. So to be able to use religion, therefore, in a way that the religion has never been used before, to have the progressive conversations, to ask these questions, to be visible. I think that's where really uh, that's where we are really in our journey in acceptance.
Faraz, people are asking where and how can they see your film?
The $1 million question, Ben. I think if they are in the United States, they can definitely watch it in film festivals. Thankfully, a lot of people have been vaccinated in the US. They've all been jabbed, so a lot of screenings are happening in the United States. In fact, we just had a screening in San Francisco last evening, and it was a house full screening. And we have multiple screenings coming up across the globe. Sadly, we do not have any screenings coming up in India as yet, so we're still waiting for our Indian premiere to happen. But as soon as the situation with the pandemic improves and we can have in-person screenings, they can follow me on social media, or they can follow the film on social media, and to get updates on where they can watch e-Korma. We really want you to watch it on the big screen and not on your laptops or your phones. So please bear with us for a little bit more longer, and we promise to bring it in every possible city in India that we can.
You need a local distributor, it sounds like. Thanks. Um,
We do.
I'm going to take a similar question over to Shivangi because, as an artist, as somebody strong in the arts, just like you are, Faraz, she wears many hats, including as a writer, a painter, a consultant, advisor. And I'm curious, and as are the audience, which of those hats do you feel like, if you could choose one, is the most effective for what you're trying to do to promote inclusion and greater inclusion? And thank you for that. And I'll have a follow-up as well. Thank you, Shivangi.
I don't know, like the word like inclusion, I don't think I'm working towards inclusion. I'm more working towards collectivization and leadership. Because inclusion, it's for me, like I would say that it's always had a bad experience whenever I am included in any space. It's always like a token representation, and it's not like a deep understanding of who I am and what I need and like my access needs and all of those things. So I think like collective access, collective liberation only comes with deeper understanding, deeper friendships, and really like challenging the systems which like the power structures that like hold us back. And I also want to mention that here that like there are a lot of different hats that I wear, but I think they're all equally important because at different points, like they all have a different role to play, because and each of those identities or professions or whatever plays into the other one, and I'm constantly learning. So I think like what also like Kanishka said about like their learning disability, I think it's so important because like I said, like we need a lot of freedom from medical models of disability, which means like we should be allowed to have self-determination where we are not always relying on like professionals and doctors and psychiatrists to know about our diagnosis, but believing in our diagnosis ourselves, like believing that that we are disabled, that we like that we do belong, you know, in what we say that we like, we have those experiences which we say that we do. And like I think like for example, the current government in India like has labeled us Divyang. The Divyang is a word that the government in India uses now for people with disability, which literally means the divine body, which is kind of I think it also comes from a lot of caste privilege that this current government, like the caste violence that this current government is kind of perpetuating, because it's everything is constantly about Hinduism and constantly about like the divine and not the person, the communities. And so I think I think those are like very important when it comes to like intersectionality and then intersectional work, which we have actually learned from Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a black feminist, who is who this word is coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and is we are not often credited, like people with disabilities, for our work. We are not credited, and even the people who belong to different castes and people who are black or people of color, our histories and our stories and our histories are not it shouldn't just be celebrated, but it's something that that should be advocated for, where we are constantly like asking that these stories be centered and these stories be normalized, and and also I think one of the things that I was also thinking about is like affordability. Like a lot of times in like people with disabilities, like you were mentioning before, the number people with disabilities is like the biggest minority, is what we say in our communities. Like the biggest disability is the biggest minority in all over the world, in any country. And I think there is so much lack of funding. So if I talk about like art, even art tools are so expensive, and those art tools are not like accessible either. And often there is also an institutionalization of art practice and art theory and art spaces. Like I said before, I didn't go to a school for art. It just came to me. And I think this institutionalization is another thing that I wanted to address, which Kanishka also mentioned, that when they were younger, they were institutionalized in a way for their learning disability. They were, they had to go to therapy. They had to be, all of these things are like very common in, I think, the queer and disability communities, where there is an institutionalization of our identities, where we are either imprisoned or we are put in certain mental health spaces where the professional knows about us more than we know about ourselves. And I think that's like very similar in art, where the professional, the person who is the head of an institution, knows more about art than the artist themselves. And I think a lot of like youth with disabilities are like questioning this now, where we are trying to push our own narratives, where we're trying to push our ideas and our stories and archiving those stories and documenting those stories, because you don't hear a lot about South Asian disabled stories and histories and all of these things. It's not there at all. Like even in the US now, that work is being done with a film that is called Crip Camp, that like became really popular. It's on Netflix, and it's really archiving the disabled history, the Crip history that exists in the US. And I think that needs to like happen here also. So yeah, I think that's what I'll say.
Thanks, Shivangi, and thanks for that plea. I resonate that plea. I echo it for you. Keep on documenting, keep on archiving, keep on telling the story. Same goes to you, Faraz. And obviously, whatever role you can play in supporting the arts from your business standpoint, Kanishka, we urge you there. Maybe to close out tonight, thank you again to our panelists. You've reminded me that, and I hope that the audience will take this for what it's worth, that in the United States, we are still working towards a more perfect union. We still have problems of division that stem from race and religion and misunderstanding. And the only way to get through it is by doing things like we did tonight, whereas we talk about it. And so to the degree that we can give each other the space to talk, and more than anything, the ears to listen, I think is how we will make ourselves a better place, a better society, more collective, more useful, more inclusive for each other. Once again, thank you to our audience. Thank you to the people on the back end who supported this, Koil Sen and Prasanna Shetty, Mahesh Pujari. Thank you to our translators once again. I'm forgetting, I know it's Gaurav and Monica. Thank you. And to our three panelists, I bid you a fine good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you, Monica.
Bye, guys.